Thank you. So it's 4:50 p.m. Monday, November 18th. I will call the St. John Common Council Finance Committee meeting to order. First bit of business is item 2.1 is the minutes of October 23rd.
Moved.
Thanks, Your Worship. Second, Councillor Radwin. Thank you. Errors or omissions? All in favor of approving the minutes, signify by saying aye. Raising your hand.
Aye.
Contrary minded. Carried. Just for those in the room, Councillor Norton is online, so when you are speaking, if you could have your microphone on so Councillor Norton could hear us, it'd be appreciated. You want to chat before we get into the agenda? Item number 3 is approval of the agenda. Draft general operating budget and St. John Water. Thank you, Your Worship. Moved, seconded by. Thanks, Councillor Radwin. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Raising your hand. Contrary minded. Carried. Item number 4, disclosures of conflict of interest, if any. Seeing none, we'll carry on. Item number 5 is consent agenda. Any questions on the consent agenda? Somebody want to move the consent agenda? Thanks, Your Worship. Seconded by
me.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Contrary minded. Carried. Item 6.1 is the 2025 draft general operating fund budget. We did have it in front of us in the last meeting, but we didn't have our tax information at that time. And with that, I will turn it over to CFO Fudge.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Finance Committee. Before we start, I'd be remiss if I didn't begin the Finance Committee acknowledging the passing of the former City of St. John Commissioner of Finance and Treasurer, my predecessor, Greg Yeomans. Greg passed away on November 12th at the age of 71. I worked closely with Greg from 2007 to 2015, and he was instrumental in my career as a boss, a mentor, and a friend. Greg's career with the city spanned 3 decades. He first started as a finance manager in 1990, then later became the finance controller, leading up to being appointed the Commissioner of Finance in 2006, up until he departed the city in 2015. After his career with the City of St. John, Greg brought his talents out west, becoming the Chief Financial Officer for Strathcona County in Alberta, as well as served on the Apex Pension Board as a subject matter expert. So just to speak about Greg, the human being, he was a man of great principle. I fondly remember many meetings in his office when I was young and impressionable, where Greg would point to a sign hanging on his office wall that said in large bold letters, integrity. He would point to that sign and tell us there was nothing more important as someone trusted to be a steward of the public purse, and qualities simply in your own personal life that are never worth compromising. Greg was intense and passionate in his work, but always compassionate for people. He treated everyone, no matter your background, status, or position in the organization, with the same respect, always willing to offer support or a helping hand. Greg was also quite an athlete, a great golfer. He was a curler, a member of the Thistle St. Andrew, and he was a great hockey player. And once I told Greg, when I worked for him, that I had never curled, I wasn't great at golf, and I could barely skate. And he made it his mission to bring me to lunch, hockey, lunch hour. The guys would all play hockey over at the Gorman Arena. So he'd bring me there. He added me to his curling team weekly. And then he took me golfing anytime he could in efforts to try to make me more competent at all 3. And I like to refer to this period of Greg's life as his greatest failure. Greg also loved music, and he was really the reason why I became a pretty big Beatles fan. So with that, most importantly, anyone who knew Greg Yeomans knew his greatest passion was for his family. Nothing was more important than his family. So sincere condolences go out to his wife, Jacqueline, his 2 daughters, Michelle and Marjorie, as well as his 5 grandchildren. Greg will be dearly missed. His leadership and contributions to the City of St. John has created a foundation for the meeting we're having today. And may you rest in peace, Greg. Let's get into it. First, I want to remind the Finance Committee on the touch points we have had it's led up to today. So on the slide, you'll see the various meetings we've had, from Shape Your Budget to council feedback to introductions to service-based budget, to our last meeting where we had a draft budget that was built based on an assumed growth rate to balance. So we've had many touch points with Finance Committee on budget. And our next steps, depending on what happens this afternoon, will be on November 25th to go to council with a receive and file recommendation for the budget. And in the utility fund budget, you'll see later this afternoon, first and second reading of the bylaw if it's approved. On December 4th, we'll be back here at the Finance Committee with an annual reserve report and year-end projections. And on December 9th, if things go to plan, we'd be before the council with a recommendation on the operating budget for the general fund and third reading on the utility fund budget, as well as the annual reserve report and recommendations. So the agenda, this is a large presentation. I'll try to go fast, but there's really 4 sections of this presentation. First, we'll talk a little bit about the tax-based growth we've received in St. John, as well as the community grant funding. Second, we'll talk about fair taxation and the multiplier and the impact on our budget. Third, we'll talk about the feedback that informed us into creating this budget. And last, we'll talk about what's actually in the 2025 proposed operating budget. So this slide I thought was a good slide to really explain the property tax process. So as you're aware, 80% of the city's revenue comes from property tax, and there's often confusion, especially in the public forum, as to who does what between the city and the province and the various agencies that are involved in the process. So this slide provides a pretty good overview of the entire process. So first of all, starting with the provincial government, who actually is responsible for creating tax law and assessment law, and they set, of course, their own provincial property tax rates. Second column would be Service New Brunswick. Service New Brunswick conducts all of the property assessments, prepares the assessment base, and mails the assessment notices out to the public. Third, there's us, municipalities, who create budgets and set local property tax rates that are sufficient enough to balance the budgets and create revenue sufficient to balance the budgets. Fourth, there's the Finance and Treasury Board of the province, who mails the tax bills out to the residents, and they also collect property taxes. So we don't actually collect the property taxes. We get revenue remitted to us from the province or from the Treasury Board, and they actually go and collect the taxes to the individual property owners. And then, of course, the property owners who pay the tax. So this slide, I know it's busy, but it provides a lot of information with respect to how assessment has gone over the last 3 years. And you'll see a green, like a red, burgundy, and an orange, which represent 2023, 2024, and 2025. So on the far left, you'll see the provincial assessment-based growth over the last 3 years. So 10.9% in 2023, 10.4% in 2024, and 8.7% in 2025. The other bookend on the far right is the City of St. John property tax assessment-based growth for the last 3 years. And it was 10.9 in 2023, 9.9 in 2024, and 6.5 in 2025. So St. John has performed very close to the provincial average, both in 2023 and 2024. We took a little bit of a dip. We underperformed by 2.2% in 2025 compared to the provincial average. In between those bookends are various cities. You can see the same trend in these cities, that it's been a declining assessment-based growth each year from 2023 to 2025. You'll notice that Dieppe, Moncton, and Fredericton have outperformed the other municipalities on the slide for all 3 years. So how did we achieve 6.5% assessment-based growth? This pie graph breaks out St. John's assessment-based change. As you can see, 41% of properties in St. John had between 0 and 5% assessment-based increase. 19% properties had no change in their assessment. 22% had between 5 and 10% assessment-based growth. And around 18% had more than 10% increase in their assessment-based growth for the properties. So the upper table on this slide is the city's assessment-based increase which translates into assessment base, which shows how we come up with the 6.52%. And that 6.52% essentially represents $525 million of additional tax base for the city of St. John, with $425 million coming from the residential class. So you can see this is the residential, non-residential, heavy industrial assessment. So around 75% of that increase has come from the residential assessment base increase, which translates into 7.13% assessment base growth. 88.2 million, or 5.61%, has been the assessment base growth for the non-residential sector, which is essentially your commercial businesses and light industry. And 12.5 million is the assessment base growth for heavy industry, which was 2.38% assessment base growth. The bottom section of this is tax base. The difference between assessment base and tax base is essentially the multiplier. So the multiplier of 1.7 gets applied to the non-residential and heavy industrial classes, which gives us our actual tax base. So it's slightly higher than what you have for assessment base. And this is the base that we would apply our $1.58 rate to in order to generate property tax revenue for the city. So if Finance Committee decided to hold the rate at $1.58, we would generate $9.5 million in new property tax revenue in 2025, with 71.3% coming from the residential class, with an increase in property taxes or tax burden on that class of $6.7 million. 25% of that revenue would come from the non-residential commercial class for $2.4 million, and $336,000 would come from the heavy industry class, representing a 3.6% increase in revenue. This slide breaks down St. John, Fredericton, Moncton, and the province assessment-based growth between what is market reassessment and new construction. So the first bar is St. John, and you can see, as I stated earlier, that whole bar combined represents 6.52%, which equates to the $526 million in new assessment-based growth. Of that, 4.87% of the 6.52% is reassessment. It's not new construction, new development. It's just revaluation. That's worth $393 million. That's the red bar. 133 million, or 1.65% of the 6.52, is from actual new construction that's been assessed into our tax base. So when you compare 133 million of new construction in St. John to that of Fredericton or Moncton in the province, new construction growth in Fredericton was 237 million, or 2.3%, while in Moncton, new construction was 330 million, or 2.89%, and the percentage assessment-based growth for new construction on average for the entire province was 2.2%. And just another way of looking at St. John using a pie chart, again, 4.87% growth from market assessment, 1.65% from new construction. And again, another way of looking at it, just a bit, as I guess reiterating the numbers I just said, St. John has underperformed Moncton and Fredericton on new construction. So when looking at new construction over the last 3 years, St. John has lagged the provincial average in new construction, as well as new construction in Moncton and Fredericton. However, the good news is in 2025, the St. John new construction increase assessment base of 1.65% exceeds both what we achieved in 2023 and 2024. So certainly that's a very positive sign that, you know, more of our tax-based growth is starting to come from new construction versus market reassessment. Hopefully a sign to come what's coming up in 2026. So just a few more slides benchmarking our assessment-based growth rate by total and class, and also includes the assessment-based growth rate of Rothesay, Quispamsis, Grand Bay, Westfield. In 2025, St. John total assessment-based growth rate underperformed compared to the growth rates of the communities on the slide. We were pretty close to Fredericton, 6.52 versus 6.98, but we did underperform, and we also underperformed compared to the provincial average of 8.84%. On the residential comparison benchmarking, Although St. John residential assessment-based growth was 7.13%, and it was the lowest benchmark rate, it was very close to the residential growth rate in Fredericton and Rasa, very close. The highest residential growth rates at over 10% were experienced in Moncton, Quispamsis, and Grand Bay Westfield. With respect to commercial or non-residential, as we refer to it, St. John performed very well, 5.61%. It is below the provincial average of 6.62% and below the growth rate of Moncton at 8.2%, 0.2%, but we slightly outperformed Fredericton, the rate of 5.36%, and we significantly outperformed our performance last year in the non-residential sector class, which was a little bit over 3%. So another encouraging sign that we're on the uptick. The final class is the heavy industrial class. St. John's growth rate was 2.38%, exceeding the provincial average of 1.68%. And all other heavy industrial growth rates, we exceeded all other heavy industrial growth rates in the province, with the exception of Dieppe, who clocked in at 3.26%. So in terms of the distribution of heavy industry in properties in the province of New Brunswick, St. John has 36.5% of all heavy industrial properties assessed in the province of New Brunswick, followed by Musquash at 19.37%, then Belledune at 10.75%, and then Dieppe and Florenceville, and then everything else in the province, 25.57%. So St. John has more heavy industry than almost entire province combined, especially in the region. And how much do we collect? So based on the 2025 assessment for heavy industry, St. John continues to advocate for fair tax reform, which includes requesting the province to transfer the provincial property taxes on heavy industry to municipalities who house those properties, which in St. John would represent almost $10 million this year, 9.965, based on the 2025 heavy industrial assessment base. And I think we've mentioned this before, the province on all heavy industrial properties collects around $27 million in annual property tax revenue from heavy industry. And it's a tiny fraction of their overall revenue, but would have we think, a small impact in the province, but a pretty huge impact on municipalities if a policy was put in place to transfer that heavy industrial tax. So, local governments have seen a significant decline in its unconditional grant funding since the province completed phase 1 of tax reform. And even though more services are being downloaded at the local level and inflation has caused record levels of infrastructure deficits, St. John will lose another $972,000 in equalization core funding, declining from $14.8 million in 2024 to $13.8 million in 2025. And you can see we're not the only ones losing unconditional grant funding. We lost 7% for St. John, while other communities who really have more core funding than equalization funding are losing around a third of their funding. Moncton's losing a third, Fredericton, Rasa, Quispamsis are all losing a third of their core funding. When you look at what St. John has lost since 2021 in the unconditional grant, so in 2021 we had $18.3 million in unconditional grant. That's a combination of core funding and equalization. In 2025, we are now down to $13.8 million. And if you accumulate that, cumulatively, look at what we've lost over that period of time, it's almost $12 million in funding over a 4-year period that the city has lost. It's a significant amount of funding with respect to that. So, any questions on assessment before I jump into fair taxation? Nope. Seeing none? Okay. Part 2 of the presentation is taking a deep dive into fair taxation and the underlying data for which we premise the need to have more flexibility on property tax rates to allow a fair sharing of overall property tax revenue. So Common Council named comprehensive tax reform the #1 catalytic advocacy priority within its 10-year strategic plan. And the narrative in the strategy is on the slide. I spoke earlier that if we maintain the current tax rate of $1.58 per 100 of assessment, we would be asking the residential class of customers to pay $6.7 million in additional property taxes to the city, which is 7.13% higher than 2024. Commercial or non-residential class would pay $2.4 million more, representing 5.61%, and heavy industry would pay $336,000 more, which is 2.38%. However, when looking at assessment-based growth over the last 4 years, the residential class of customer, and I want to be clear, residential class isn't just homeowners. Residential class includes apartment buildings that are used for residential purposes. It includes some institutions like universities, schools, hospitals. So it's not just homeowners, but it's obviously heavily impacts the homeowner and, I guess the affordable housing when it comes to the cost of ownership. So looking at the assessment-based growth over the last 4 years, the residential class of customers has seen their assessment base increase by almost 40% in a 4-year period since January 1, 2022, while the non-residential class assessments have increased by around 16% over the last 4 years, and heavy industry has increased by about 8.4% over the last 4 years. Now, this is a key slide. I want to take a little bit of time on this one. So in 2023, as part of the Phase 1 property tax reform, the provincial government added heavy industry as a new class of customer. We never had heavy industry as a class of customer before. And they also allowed municipalities through reform, Phase 1 reform, to change the multiplier, which was previously a fixed 1.5 rate on non-residential. And they allowed that to be modified or changed to either a range of 1.4, so you could reduce it by a little bit, or up to 1.7. Meanwhile, in the same year, when this new flexibility was offered, the provincial government reduced the provincial property tax rate, which only impacts non-residential and heavy industrial customers. They reduced the provincial property tax rate by 33 cents. Applies to those two. Does not apply to residential customers, only to heavy industry and non-residential. So even though St. John increased the tax rate by 19 cents, so this is what it was in 2022, and because of the multiplier change and the change in tax rate, we increased the tax rate on non-residential and heavy industry by 19 cents. At the same time, they received a 33-cent reduction at the provincial rate. So overall, in 2023, there was a 14-cent benefit to non-residential heavy industrial property tax owners that we could not enter into. We couldn't step into that space because we maxed out at 1.7 in terms of the ability to do so. So when you look at the property taxes paid due to rising assessments, and if we keep the tax rate at $1.58 this year, just hypothetically, if we decide to do that, the city will have levied $24 million in new taxes on the residential class since 2022. Right here. St. John has levied $6.7 million in new taxes over the total 4 years of the non-residential class since 2022. However, that class, you'll see in the brackets up here, that class at the same time received a 33-cent reduction that represents approximately $5 million annually in reduced taxes at the provincial level, meaning an overall decline in overall property taxes when you combine them together. When looking at heavy industry, again, the city has increased taxes on heavy industry through our own rate of $1.1 million over 4 years. However, that class, through the 33-cent reduction, received a $1.7 million reduction in the provincial property tax bill. So when you add it all up, I guess before we add it all up, given the significant burden placed upon the residential tax class over the last 4 years, we are recommending in this budget a 3-cent reduction in the property tax rate, going from $1.58 to $1.55. This will partially reduce the residential property tax burden, increase from $6.7 million, which is what we get at $1.58, down to 4.8 million based on a $1.55 tax rate. And that would reduce the residential property tax burden increase from 7.13% to 5.09%. However, because the current property tax laws peg the non-residential rate and the heavy industrial rate to the residential rate via multiplier, both those classes will also receive the benefit of lower property tax rates, with non-residential benefiting by almost $840,000. So they would go from 2.3 million down to paying 1.5, and the heavy industrial class would go from paying 2.38% more at 335,000 to 0.44% more for an additional for a reduction of 275,000. So they would be paying 61,000 compared to 335,000. Everybody following me so far? Okay. So what's the overall impact? So with our recommendation of 3 cents on the table for your consideration, what you see is 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025 proposed at $1.55. You'll see 2 columns for each year. One, what the city has levied, and the second column for the year is the impact of the 33-cent reduction at the provincial level for provincial property taxes. So by reducing the tax rate by 3 cents, you'll see on the table that the 4-year residential class tax burden would be reduced from 24 million over 4 years to 22.2 million since 2022. Here. You also see on the rows labeled non-residential and heavy industry, even though the city has levied more taxes due to increase in the multiplier. So you can see 2022 was lower taxes for non-residential and heavy industry from the municipal rate because we actually reduced the rate quite significantly that year. But 2023 was the year where we added the multiplier, right? So 1.7, the multiplier went up. So we levied $6.2 million more on the non-residential class and 1.3 million more on the heavy industrial class. But at the same time, the 33-cent reduction was a $5 million benefit and a $1.7 million benefit. The next year in 2024, we levied $270,000 more on the non-residential class, but they continue to get the 33-cent reduction, right? Because it's permanently reduced to $1.85. So when you look at the increases at the municipal level, they're more than offset by the reductions from the 33-cent property tax rate provincially, to where non-residential and heavy industry actually benefited from lower taxes because of the provincial, not because of the municipality, because of the provincial property tax rate, whereas the residential sector had a $22 million increase. We cannot step into this. We're at the maximum of the multiplier. And since 2015, our premise of fair taxation was we don't want to levy more taxes on anybody. We don't want to levy more taxes on the business community, heavy industry, but we want to be able to enter space when the province vacates it. And the province vacated it in 2023, and we were not able to enter that vacated space with the multiplier that was set at 1.7. So approximately, if you take this, less this, approximately $10 million in provincial tax room could not be entered into by the city to relieve the residential class. And we know from benchmarking and the work that was conducted by the municipal expert, Harry Kitchen, that when you benchmark cities across Canada, similar to St. John in population, composition, and in composition of residential, commercial, heavy industry, a multiplier of 1.7 is quite low. And you can see some of the multipliers from other cities. They range from 2 to 9 for heavy industry. Commercial ranges from 2 to 4, 2 to 3, 3.5. And then also the Altus Group did a benchmarking assessment in 2021, and they benchmarked the average commercial to residential property tax ratios for major urban centers across Canada, and the average was 2.7, which is a whole, one more than our maximum of 1.7. So again, I know we're sounding like a broken record, but our call is for reform. so that when property tax room is vacated, municipalities have the ability to enter that room and make reasonable tax rate decisions that are fair and equitable in each of the municipalities' communities.
Just can you go back for a second, Kevin? Like, I don't want to leave anybody with the false impression that we did enter some of the room,
Absolutely.
but the 33 cents, yes. The conversation we had with the provincial government of the day was they stepped out of some tax room to allow municipalities to move into that room. And what happened was they stepped out of 2 rooms and let us walk into 1. So at the end of it, because this isn't advertised, right? Like that, except for every year, Kevin, when you talk about it, that going on to 4 years later, depending what happens at the end of our budget here, for all the pushback that we have gotten about 1.7 in that conversation, non-residential and heavy industry properties are paying less now than they were 4 years ago, and the cumulative benefit they have achieved is $12 million. Yeah. I'm just adding 7.8 and 4.3.
22 and around 12, yeah.
Yeah, they have benefited from $12 million. And for us to, anyway, yeah. But I mean, we did get to enter some, we did get more money. But the money that's been left on the table and the very quiet subsidy to non-residential heavy industry given by the province hasn't really been talked about. Sorry, continue on. I don't want to hold you too much, but I think that's important.
So let's talk about what a multiplier would need to be in order to ensure that tax revenue is commensurate with assessment-based growth. So if the city was able to set a multiplier this year only, because we're dealing with 2025, of 1.733. So the top table is what we can do right now. So at a $1.55 tax rate, 5.09% burden on the residential sector, 3.6 and 0.44 for a total of 4.24. At $6.3 million, $6.4 million in new revenue for the city. If we were able to set a multiplier of 1.733, the city would be able to maintain the same revenue of $6.4 million. However, we would be able to even further reduce the property tax burden on the residential class by another $1.1 million, reducing the burden from 5.09 to 3.87%. And because, as we have seen in the previous slide, it is the residential class that has seen a $22 million increase since 2022, while the other classes have paid less due to the provincial property tax rate reduction. We believe that would have been a fair thing to do this year is to set a multiplier a bit higher than we're setting it at 1.7. And if we were able to set a multiplier at 1.733, and we had the ability to set separate rates for residential customers, we'd actually be able to set a rate of 1.53 for residential class customers, with a 1.55 for non-residential and heavy industrial class customers, but with a multiplier of 1.733. I know it's a lot of math. Hopefully you're following it.
We've been talking about it for a long time. I get it.
And yeah, that's it for fair tax. If anyone has any questions.
Go ahead, Councilor.
It's not so much question, it's just how frustrating we all are after all of this time talking about this. And I certainly hope that this new provincial government is aware of this. I believe we've made them very aware of it, that they do something about this. Even getting us our heavy industry tax, allowing us to keep that is going to make a huge difference to us. But this is one of those things that I am so tired of talking about it and hearing about it. It's time to get something done about it. And if we lower the tax rate again this year, that's 4 years in a row. that's every year that we've been on council, this, Paula and I and the rest of us, that needs to be shouted from the rooftops, because it goes completely dark when the province steps in and says, or lowers their tax rate. Nobody recognizes that we've done anything, right? And it's cheating us out of just a small bit of glory, but yet saving our taxpayers so much money. And it's so frustrating.
Welcome to the Finance Committee.
Yeah. Yeah, I know where I'm gonna be.
So we'll jump into just the premise behind how we built the budget. We had a number of feedback sessions. First, we had a feedback session with council, and we heard a number of themes. We heard themes about traffic calming. We heard about the desire to have a roundabout. I think that's been taken care of in the capital budget. We've heard housing, parks and recreation, bylaw enforcement, being growth ready, lower taxes, and performance management. We also did a Shape Your Budget engagement session, and although it's not statistically valid, there's 160 responses. It still informs to some extent. And the top 5 priorities that on Shape Your Budget were roads, affordable housing advocacy, police services, snow plowing, and parks and recreation facilities. We also asked through Shape Your Budget residents' desire to see a property tax rate reduction. And through that Shape Your Budget process, 56% of respondents indicated they would rather see a property tax rate reduction than an increase in service levels based on the top 5 priorities. Last year it was around 50-50. This year was a little bit more on the reduce the tax rate, and perhaps that's a reflection of the economy and the affordability the folks are feeling out there. So we're into the operating budget recommendation, and maybe we'll wait a second for Councillor Stewart. Do you want to jump right in?
Yeah.
Jump right in? All right. So we are recommending a 2025 general operating budget in the amount of $194,366,011. This represents almost a $7 million increase over 2024, or 3.5% increase over 2024. Funded by a year-over-year increase in property tax revenue of $6.3 million, which equates to an increase of 4.24% on tax burden year over year. We're also recommending a property tax rate of $1.55 per $100 of assessed value, which is a 3-cent reduction in the tax rate from $1.58. Excuse me. This would mean over the last 4 years, the city has reduced the property tax rate by 23.5 cents, or by 13.2 cents. We started at $1.78.5, and if the recommendation is endorsed, brings us to $1.55. We recommend council keep the multiplier at the maximum of 1.7, supported by the fair tax assessment that I showed earlier. And the budget also includes, as we discussed earlier, a $969,000 reduction in the unconditional grant. So here's a snapshot of the overall budget proposed in 2025 compared to the same budget lines approved by council in 2024. And we'll get to each of those services in a little bit. This graph is just a representation of what the city has approved since 2015 over the last 10 years as a general operating budget. You can see the dip that took place in 2021. That's the restructuring that occurred in 2021. That's where we cut $10 million out of the budget for sustainability. However, from 2021 to the budget proposed today, the city will have added back $37 million over the last 4 years, an increase of almost 24% in a 4-year period, or on average 6% per year. So although some may say we've been dealing with austerity, over the last 4 years, we have been able to make some sizable reinvestments in the public service to see our budget today proposed at $194.4 million. And that's just as I mentioned, the property tax rate that's changed since 2021, steady decline. So what's in the budget for enhancements? Mentioned the 3-cent tax rate reduction. The budget also includes council's catalytic priority of investing in a multiplex project. So there's $3 million in this budget for a multiplex, future multiplex project. That brings our total reserve up to $9 million. You'll recall council approved a plan to invest $20 million in this project, which was to set aside $3 million per year over 5 years for 15 and to borrow another 5. So we're well on our way to achieving that strategy. There's also a new parks operations superintendent added to the budget to support the park service. We have a new traffic calming manager in the budget to look at the traffic calming request, from a risk management perspective and try to prioritize how we achieve what's best for our community. We have a $2.8 million housing accelerator fund initiatives in the budget. Now, there's a slide later that kind of breaks that out. That's what's proposed to be spent in 2025. And we have a subsidy to the St. John Industrial Parks with a new entity being stood up. We have a new skilled worker to enhance mowing services in the city, and that skilled worker will also be able to move over into winter management and winter maintenance during the off season. So I know beautification was a point of feedback from council. I think we're addressing that in this budget. There's a new asset management position funded, 50% general fund, 50% St. John Water. We do have an infrastructure deficit that I think probably Mr. Fogan will discuss later, exceeds over $500 million. So it's important that we understand our assets and we have strategies to address it. We have enhanced IT support with a new customer service specialist and business solutions officer. We have a new plumbing inspector funded 50% by the general fund and 50% by the utility. 50% by the general fund and 50% through half funding, housing accelerator fund funding. We have 6 new FTEs in parks, 2 permanent positions and 4 casual positions, increasing the level of service for maintenance, beautification, garbage pickup, trail maintenance, snow clearing. So that was something we heard from council loud and clear. There's a significant increase in transit funding, 11% for $750,000. I want to be clear, that's not additional service. That's the cost that we're seeing right now. Transit's trending at a significant deficit in 2024. And so that's the amount that we believe is required in order to have that service in its current service levels being provided, being able to balance in 2025. And then we're on the second year of some draws from growth reserve funding for 3 resources to support dangerous and dilapidated buildings, minimum property standards, and bylaw compliance services. So we talked about, of our property tax revenue, 99 million is residential, 43 million is non-residential, and 14 million is in heavy industrial property tax revenue for the city in 2025. We can't benchmark tax rates yet. The only community that we've seen so far that has tipped their hand on what their tax rate's going to be is Fredericton. They've indicated through their public sessions that they intend to reduce their tax rate by 2 cents. I know Moncton's having their budget sessions this week, so we'll keep on top of that. And all the other tax rates are 2024 tax rates, with the exception of St. John proposed and what Fredericton has currently proposed. But you can see we're still, from a competitiveness perspective, we're still quite significantly higher than other communities. Our long-term financial plan is to bring that tax rate over time to $1.37 in the city of St. John. All right, so most significant variances in revenues, other revenues outside of property tax, are in growth and community services revenue for almost $3 million, public safety revenue of almost $700,000, and strategic services revenue for over $300,000. I'll explain those variances on the next slide. So in growth and community services, the largest contributor to that revenue increase is obviously the Housing Accelerator Fund. That's a $2.8 million fund. We're also drawing some reserve funds for industrial parks for $180,000. So I think it's the majority of what you see on other revenues. On public safety, there's revenues being recovered for workers' compensation for police service. So it's around $600,000. There's some increases associated with emergency dispatch service revenue. And on strategic services, it's really the funding of we're embarking on an enterprise resource planning software ERP project. It's going to be one of the most significant changes in systems, and I guess this government will have seen in a while. Last time we've had an ERP change was 1999. These investments are 30-year investments. They change the way we do business internally and externally. So we do have a couple resources, a project manager and another resource supporting that project that's being funded out of the capital budget. That's coming in as other revenue in the budget. So on the expenditure side of things, $6.6 million increase by service on the slide here. So we're going from 187 million to 194 million. And in a nutshell, what does that represent? Really, 3.8 million is in wage and benefit increases. Housing Accelerator Grant revenue of, Housing Accelerator Grant incentives of 1.8 million. Housing Accelerator Fund investments of another 1 million outside of the incentives. Police Commission grant would be a $1.2 million increase. And then our debt, this is a good news story. Our debt repayment, principal and interest in 2025 is $1.2 million less than last year because we've been able to reduce the debt size for the city of St. John significantly. And all that goes right back to the community or through tax rate reduction. All that contributes to that. So it's a good news story. We've had some success in reducing the cost of regional facilities. The Transit Commission, again, I mentioned the increase there. And we had a reduction in the capital reserve funding this year, just based on our strategies and planning. And the next slides really just break out each of those services and the increases for each of those services and the reasons for each of those increases. I think I mentioned growth in community services with the Housing Accelerator Fund. There's some additional recreation programming, and there's also industrial parks grant in that service. That's a 16.12% increase for that service. Public works and transportation. There's the resource for mowing and cleaning. Landscape, park and open spaces I mentioned that we're funding this year, $823,000. Transit operating subsidies in there for $750 some thousand, and the new traffic engineers in there as well for about $100,000 for public works. Public safety, really, it's inflation. For fire, 911 EMO, it's really inflation. That's a 3.59% increase. And on police commission, there's proposed 4 new officers, also inflation in that budget as well. Utilities and infrastructure is a 6.8% increase. That's where your new asset manager position, obviously normal inflation. There's some building maintenance in that budget as well with respect to the enclosed patio we have that we didn't have in previous years. Strategic services, this is really the 2 positions at IT, positions that I referenced earlier to support the IT strategy as well as the ERP project management function. Corporate services, it's inflation. Industrial parks was moved from corporate services to the growth service. So you're seeing it's just a reallocation. And there's a little bit of a professional service increase to support the labor relations plan. Other charges is a reduction of $1.7 million or 4.65%. And again, that's a reduction primarily associated with the lower debt service that we're paying because of our lower debt levels. Housing Accelerator Fund project, $2.8 million. You'll see that project in 2025 is funding 6 temporary positions and a whole slew of initiatives that is in the Housing Accelerator Fund plan. I'm not going to go into detail, but it's a good news story for the city to be able to make that type of investment in the community with 100% funding from other level of government. And again, on this slide, this just breaks it a little bit differently. This is the Housing Accelerator Fund of $2.7 million, but you can see the wages and benefit cost is around $600,000. But you see the lion's share of that program is in incentives, $1.8 million in incentives through the Housing Accelerator Fund program that we're hoping really makes a big difference in St. John. And I just wanted to highlight that there are other investments, city-funded investments. We do have a still funded in the budget, the affordable housing, the manager of housing, position, who oversees policies, has created soft cost policies, oversees our grant policies and programs. We also have funding that we're pulling from the growth reserve for the North End secondary plan. So there's a $425,000 investment in the budget for the North End plan. 200 from growth reserve, an FCM grant of 175,000, and then 50,000 from the Housing Accelerator Fund. Wage escalation policy really is just the wage escalation policy for 2025 is 3.27%. That's the lower of the rolling tax base growth and CPI +1. And the main message is the budget before you this afternoon complies with the wage escalation policy. And this is the final slide that supports the reason we have lower principal interest at the city. We've had in 2015, $118 million in general fund debt. That's debenture debt. That's not net debt. This is true debt that we have to repay. And as of 2025, we're looking at around $74 million. So it's a significant amount of debt retired, which, especially when interest rates have been higher in these years, has been really significant for the city. And with that recommendation is the Finance Committee endorsed the proposed 2025 general operating budget and direct staff to bring forward the budget to Common Council for receive and file at its next meeting. I'd be happy to take any questions. Also, we have senior staff in the room as well, if there's questions about any particular service area.
Thanks. Your worship has moved it. Seconder.
Seconding it for sure.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. So on the questions, comments, concerns, conundrums, queries. I have a longer list, but we don't have time. Councillor Edmund, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This was a really hard one, but I first want to thank staff because I think that the budget really reflects listening to council, maybe a little bit from the taxpayers' feedback, probably not a whole lot because there wasn't a huge amount of people that participated this time, but it was only the first time. Unfortunately, I'm not going to support this proposal just because I don't think that the ratepayers can handle this level of tax burden. So, and I do recognize that, the city is going through growing pains. We've had huge increase in residents. Some projects have taken a little longer getting going as far as development goes. There's been pressures there in the market. But there's a real affordability challenge right now in households. And, the tax burden really has gone up about 37 million in 4 years. So that's significant. I think that we need to be really looking to performance management to see where can we shave off time, where do we need maybe more technology to speed certain things up, where are the gaps. I think that has to be a culture shift that we have at City Hall, and I know that we definitely need buy-in of staff to do that. I took a look. So the average household now as of last year is going for $365,000, which, that's crazy to think about that. And I thought, what are they paying now? And if we lower the tax rate to 1.55, what will the difference be? Works out to around $180 more in their house. I kind of feel like, we could actually price people right out of their homes, right out of their apartments. We have a humanitarian crisis right now. And so this is why it's hard. But I think staff have listened to us. We keep saying we need more. We're feeling growing pains. So this is real. So it's no reflection on staff, but just looking at it and thinking, okay, what are people going to pay more? And that's significant when you're having a hard time at the grocery store, at the gas station, and then you have more pressures and more pressures. It's getting difficult. I've had people come to me, multiple people saying, I can't handle much more. And that's worrisome. So, for me, I would love to be able to support something. If there was another, maybe 2 cents taken down, how does that look? I certainly don't want, for us to lose any staff. We need to be able to keep services as they are now. And we're dealing with inflation. That's the reality. The other thing is like, are we going to continue having growth like this? We're going through contract negotiations right now. How does that look long term? I know Councillor Stewart and I were not on council for the last council, but like I watched that last council close a fire station. And I will tell you, I spent a lot of time watching council, and every single one of you walked out of that room. It was gut wrenching. And so like, I know we won't have to make cuts, and probably the next council wouldn't have to make cuts, but what about the ones after? So anyway, I don't know. We'll see how everybody feels about this, but I personally would love to see another 2 cents go down. What does that look like? Can we maintain it with staff being the same? And sure, we have a lot more pressure. So what is that going to look like? But that's kind of where I sit. But I appreciate staff because I think they really listened, and we've been asking for more and more and more. So you've listened. It's just the overall picture. It's like, it's a lot of tax burden. So thank you, CFO Fudge. You've done a great job with what we've asked, and but I just don't want to put the burden on people anymore.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Norton, just going to check in with you online to see if you have any questions or comments.
No, at this time, just kind of listening to the comments right now. So I'll reserve any comments for either near the end or for the next session. So far, I'm understanding and fairly supportive of where we're going.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stewart, go ahead.
I'll jump in for a quick second. I can support this. This all looks good. The fact that we're talking about another tax decrease, again, I go back to what I said before I left the room, that we need to shout this from the rooftops. Maybe the province is going to help us out even more now. It's going to look better for everybody. But us lowering the tax rate 4 years in a row is a huge, huge win in my books. And that's what we need to be focusing on.
Thanks, Councillor. Your worship.
Agree. I'm 100% supportive of it. The gut wrenching cutting services. We need to make sure our services. So that's the balance for me. I'm good with it.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm fine with what's been presented. I'm certainly content that staff came back with a tax rate reduction when I think it's one of those things. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And this is just another nibble on the elephant. Because the other piece that wasn't up there, and we're waiting for the rest of the data to come, as much as we have the highest tax rate that was on the slide, now pending what the other cities in the province announced, as of last year, we were contentedly in the middle of everybody. So, there's no more claim of having the highest tax rate in the province. Taxes are going up. And this is a part of that whole math that people have difficulty understanding. Yes, we're proposed, and I am very supportive of reducing the tax rate, but in all the math, our taxes are still going up. One piece, I don't know if Mr. CFO, in all of your Excel spreadsheets, you have this. But when you look at the amount of residential taxes increased by assessment, thankfully, we have 1.6% of an increase because of new development. With the increase in assessment and the decrease in rate, did you figure out what the tax burden would be on somebody on the average residence would be in St. John?
So I think today, actually, the Telegraph Journal had a commercial real estate. I think it was a real estate association that indicated the average sales price in St. John was around $340,000. I believe that, if my memory serves me correct. So 1 cent on a home that's $340,000 is around $35.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking that with the assessment increase, maybe I'll send this to you as a word problem. We can solve before council. Like last year, we knew that we had with our choice in the tax rate and the assessments, we had raised the residential burden by 9.9%. But last year we had 0.6 new, if I remember your slides, as opposed to 1.6 new construction. So I'm really interested in what's the overall pressure of increasing the assessment, reducing the tax rate versus that 9.9% increase of last year. So we'll
We can look at that.
yeah, we'll work with that one and come back because, folks that have been beat up by rate increases. I think my sense is this one will be closer to 4 or 5%, but we need to do the math. And I would suggest this is very surgical compared to budgets that I have experienced in the distant past, right? What keeps us from the structural deficit is all of our plans and policies that we put in place. And it's our approach to budgeting is now based on strategic plans, financial plans, market plans, Move SJ plans. Folks around the table, like when you look at where we are now and how the city of St. John operates versus the weekend where everybody presents and it's zero-based budgeting every year, we are so far ahead, because all of our plans are vetted and have gone through scrutiny. So I'm comfortable with what's been presented. And the thing I like about staff is kind of like Siri. You're always listening, whether we're putting motions forward or not. Staff is always listening, and our discussions around the table, our discussions over supper, during teach-ins, and staff are absorbing all of that. And even if we haven't formally said it in a meeting, those opinions and the consensus conversations we have get reflected in the budget. And I'm incredibly appreciative of that work. One real little piece I'm going to throw out there, and Councillor Norton, I'm blaming you. Our conversation around traffic cameras. Can we integrate that into the conversation over traffic calming? I know I mentioned it, but when I look at Mr. Hugenholtz back there as well, and holistically, I'm not sure if that's us, it's the police commission, it's a combination, but as far as services, if we're looking at traffic calming, I see that as a tool. And I know we're in a conversation and more of a conversation with the province about, okay, if we're spending the money, where's the revenue coming from? But then I got thinking afterwards, if we're giving out automatic tickets on Douglas Avenue, is that cheaper than putting in the speed cushions? Right? Regardless of if it's cheaper to do that and you hit somebody in the wallet versus taking out their muffler if they're going too fast. I would like to see, I think for safety aspects and the traffic calming, I'd like to advance our research and conversation in that. Go ahead, CAO.
Yeah, it's a good point, Chair, and that's something we plan on discussing this week at the Public Safety Committee meeting. And, given the responsibilities of the FRSC at the regional level and giving the impact of this at the regional level, we are making a recommendation to have the FRSC do an analysis of this and also give consideration to a revenue sharing model and then report back to the region through the Regional Transportation Committee.
Excellent. And I'm confident that the new chair of the Public Safety Committee may have interest in the conversation. Don't let going through all those channels slow us down so that it's not next year I'm asking about it again. Because I think we're having the conversation in the right spaces, but this is where conversations and bureaucracy can make it really slow. Just throw that out. Yeah. What we've got in front of us, I think, is well researched, and I can take this to council comfortably. So last chance for comment. Councillor Edmonds, you're.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
if you don't mind, Chair, I just wanted to bring up one other point is that I do have some concerns that our tax rate is not going to be competitive enough for development. So I guess that my thought in a perfect world for me would be for staff to come back with some sort of idea of what maybe a 2-cent rate reduction is. And then, if we get fair taxation, and I mean in our bank account as a city, then I'd love to be able to put all of these things back into our plan because we've been talking about them. We need them, right? It's with the growth, we need these things. So anyway, I mean, I that would be in an ideal world for me is that we would be able to do that and we would have the ability to do that because it's long overdue fair taxation and we certainly need that industrial tax, and being able to do that for me would allow me to feel comfortable that I have not put a tax burden on residents, but then they got all of these wonderful, nice, shiny things that we should be doing. So thanks, Chair.
No, just a quick clarifying question. You're wondering about a 5-cent tax reduction versus the 3, like another 2 cents.
Another 2.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Perhaps I'm giving some math to the CFO. That might be a good conversation for the two of you to have before we get to next step of council. Because longer term, I think you bring up a good point. I think the long-term financial plan addresses some of it, but if it comes to pass that the good conversation with the province brings the industrial tax to St. John, I don't know if we handle a $9 million paycheck that gets dropped off. So will be a good conversation to have. Are there any last round comments? So we have a motion on the floor. On the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Aye. Contrary minded? Note that Councillor Edwin is contrary. The motion is carried. We've got 3 minutes. Quick question. The long-term financial plan for the utility.
We can table that.
That one can get tabled?
The budget for the utility fund has to.
Yes, no, so now I know the utility is really exciting too. The punchline for me is the rate at the end.
That's right.
Can you hit the high points between between the 2 goalposts I just gave?
In 3 minutes, I can do that.
Here.
We'll move on to whatever the item number is. Mr. Fogan, you're up.
Mr. Evans, let me keep you right there so you can flip through those.
6.2.
Pertinent slides are the second one. No proposed rate increases for flat rate customers for the 7th year straight. So it'll be 17 or still at 1428. There are some highlights in the presentation about where the increase in revenue would come from. Just some additional customers on our potable, which you've already seen the draft budget. So this is just an update for this for referral to council. Next is the industrial. As you're well aware, you've seen the industrial rate setting every year, so I won't go through some of the past system. You're all aware that the system is fully separate from the potable. It's considered on its own. It's fully funded. It pays for itself. There's no cross subsidization. There's rates set specifically for the east and west customers, and for specific customers. You're at the rate slide. Perfect. So this is all the components that go into the industrial rate setting. Everything from the operation cost contributes to the asset replacement, rate stabilization reserves, new debt associated with the industrial system and delivering the service, and also the previous debt related with building that service out. So there's 4 new rates that are in your kit for the 4 customers. This is Irving Oil and Irving Paper. And then on the next slide, we see the west ones, Irving Pulp and Paper and NB Power. And then finally, the slide with the recommendation to approve the proposed 2025 utility fund operating budget for the next meeting of common council for approval for first and second reading of the water and sewage bylaw amendments.
Second.
Worship, Councillor Radwin. On the motion, questions? the only comment I will make, all the conversation that Councillor Radwin brought forward is incredibly important about burden. 7 years in a row, holding the line on the cost of water. It's a weird one to be shouting from the rooftops. We don't pay more for sewage. But you know what? That is, customers in St. John paid a lot of money for this new system that we have, but we have a modern system that's going to keep us healthy. Wins awards on the water side, and we've maintained the rates for 7 years, so that's a win.
Absolutely. Huge.
All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. And just, take a motion to table 6.3. All in favor, aye. Raise your hand. Contrary minded. Just before take the motion for adjournment. Wow. Incredibly important continuation of our principles and surgically reinstalling some services and targeting services where residents said they wanted them, where council said they wanted them. And I think it's a real tribute to the memory of Greg Yeomans that we're doing what we're doing now, because the stuff he wrestled with when he was here. So thank you so much to staff for all of that. For those of us who were here when Greg was here, I think he would really appreciate the work this crew has done. And more good conversation to come. I'm going to stop talking or I'm going to cry. Take motion to adjourn. Thanks, Your Worship. Second, we're adjourned.